Welcome back, everyone, to the Succession series on Rule the Waves with the Historical Gamer, XTRG, and myself, Tortuga Power. So it is with a heavy heart that I reveal to you that the Historical Gamer the First, the now previous French director, naval director of the French fleet, was killed earlier this month, January 1906, while he was touring the Historical Gamer class ships. It was an outdated beam which broke free and crushed him. The metaphor here was lost to nobody. No, I'm just kidding. So it's now my tenure. We have that is going to be one of the main things. But if we look back upon the tenure of the Historical Gamer, he'll definitely be best known for his acquisition of Sardinia, and also for putting up several good light cruisers. It appears that the light cruisers have performed very well in his time. Not much. Also, the armored cruisers performed very well. I would say that the armored cruisers maybe were even the highlight. So his cruisers just did a phenomenal job. You could almost see this as, I don't know how to pronounce it, but the Jean Ecole or Ecole. I know it's accented on the first E, but or Ecole. I don't know French. And that's another remark I'll make right away, that I apologized immediately for all the attempted pronunciations, but really the mispronunciations of French that will go on in this series. You can kind of think of it as comic relief if you would, because that would make it seem like it's intentional rather than just born of ignorance. Anyway, so let me continue with the summary of the Historical Gamer's time, at least from my perspective. Now, if this is the first episode you're watching of this series, and this is kind of catching you by surprise, like, why is Tortuga saying welcome back? Well, you probably missed the first episodes, which I now have, or I have had updated the playlist. You can also find it on, this video might be coming from the Historical Gamers playlist. He's also keeping a playlist up to date. So, anyways, this is not the first video in the series, which is why I'm saying welcome back and such. You probably missed the Historical Gamer's tenure, his 8 videos, which were, obviously the rest of this video, the rest of this series is not going to make sense unless you have that as what happened in the first time period. Just to recap the way we're doing it, it's 6 years per person. So January 1906 is my turn and so Historical Gamer has left his. And when it comes to January 1912, I'll pass it on to XTRG. Then 1918, it'll cycle back to the Historical Gamer, and so on and so forth until, I guess, in 1936, XTRG brings the series to a close. So again, without getting further sidetracked, what can we say about 1900 to 1906? Well, he was already strapped, our previous naval director, God rest his soul, was already strapped with some pretty terrible designs, and we already see put into reserve fleet was the Trident class. It only has access to a 3-sided broadside. What I think is I'm not sure, I haven't run the numbers lately, but if I'm not mistaken, a single turret with only a single gun, 2 such turrets, is actually more weight, more tonnage, than a single double gun turret. So this makes this design even more preposterous because it only has a 3-gun broadside, and on top of that, I think you expend more weight to do it. Now, what's the advantage? Well, I guess you could say that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, that perhaps if one of the turrets get knocked out, you have other turrets to go, but I don't think that that's a good trade-off to make in this case. So I'll just go through these very briefly. The rest of the French battleships, aside from the new Historical Gamer class, are all kind of the same. They all have this double turret in front and rear, and they have, sometimes in casemates, sometimes in turrets, they also have these 6-inch secondary guns. The standard way that the battleships were done for armor scheme is very heavy belt and actually lighter on turret than belt, which to me it's not the way I would do it, but I think it actually makes sense for the early time period. For the 1900s to maybe like 1910, you're not going to get too many turret flash fires or whatever. Really, penetration of armor in almost any sense, like from any battleship to another battleship, is pretty limited. So you don't see a whole lot, like true to form, it's very rare to get a battleship kill in the early 1905, from 1905 or earlier, without getting a torpedo hit. Torpedoes, the great equalizer, do have the power to sink them, but rarely I mean, you can imagine if you want, the image that comes to my mind, because it's just an image I'm familiar with for some reason, is the Civil War duel between the ironclads, where they just blasted each other from point blank, and nothing really changed. I mean, nobody did any damage. The only damage they did was just because they weren't very good. They weren't very seaworthy, so they started to sink. So, anyway, going through. So I'm not going to go through the rest of these. We have the Marengo. This is the turreted secondaries. Charles Martel, very light ship, 12,800. We'll keep that number in the back of our mind, because when we get down to our heavy cruisers in a second, that'll be an interesting point. I really don't like this cruiser, the Brennus, because 7-inch guns just doesn't make sense to leave them at 7-inch. The 6-inch guns, this is a game mechanic, so it's not like there's a official cutoff in real life, but it's an abstraction that they have to make. That 7-inch guns or more have a harder time, a specific large penalty aiming at destroyers. So if you're going to have a secondary gun that's at 7 or 6, you might as well make it 6 so that it's as effective targeting destroyers. And then to compensate, you could just add a few more with the extra tonnage that would give you. And I don't think there's many ships that would be sunk by a 7-inch that wouldn't also be sunk by a 6-inch. You're kind of looking at, I'm thinking like a light cruiser range there. Anyways, I don't want to get too distracted by all these things. It's kind of fun to talk about, but the Gaydon, I think this is a lousy armored cruiser. No fault of Historical Gamer. This is part of his legacy fleet. I'll mention in particular the ones that he built himself, because I do have some interesting comments about those. Or I find that some of the designs were interesting, and I'll like kind of reflect on my own thoughts. Now that I am the naval director, we're going to have a change of policy. Some of the things are going to change a bit. I won't be scrapping any of the ships. I don't feel like that'll be really in the spirit of the game. Maybe eventually we'll be scrapping some of these old ones, but I won't be scrapping any of the current battleships in development, at least. The Trident class, as Historical Gamer pointed out, is probably the first that will go, but it's only 400,000 right now because we have it in reserve fleet. One thing we're also going to do is move all our battleships back to Northern Europe, where they will probably end up engaging the British. And I might even just off camera in between this episode and the next one arrange exactly who I want where. Like maybe we'll move the Tridents. So these guys, even though they're in, I don't know if they can be moved down to the Mediterranean. Although we technically have home waters there, it's not like the official home waters, because you have one official home water. So this is our home area, but does it say this? It might actually say this is also our home area. It does, but and those are definitely in the Mediterranean. I just don't know if you're allowed to put active or reserve fleet people into a area where they don't have home waters. And you can't blockade the French from the Mediterranean. You have to blockade them from Northern Europe, which is why I'm not sure exactly what the game mechanics are here. But let's just try to send them on down south and see if they stay in. Nope, see, they went to active fleet. Well, we'll just try that one more time. When they get down to the Mediterranean, I'll try to put them back to reserve fleet, because it might make sense that they can't be in reserve and move. So we'll give that another go in a moment. Anyway, I didn't really finish the tenure of Historical Gamer. Let's just jump right to it. The Deputy Trois, the pronunciation, I apologize. I really like this ship. I think it's really good. I mean, the downside, the glaring shortcoming of this ship is the speed. It's barely able to get away from a battleship, and it certainly won't be able to elude even the later, like even the dreadnoughts. We'll probably see a few around 20 knots. And just because you're at 21 knots and the dreadnought's at 20, your rate of escape is so low that you'll probably take a lot of fire, and maybe they'll end up doing enough damage to slow you down, and then you're just dead. However, for a heavy cruiser, for an armored cruiser, I should say, that's what the CA stands for at this time. They haven't developed the term heavy cruiser quite yet. So for an armored cruiser, it has phenomenal armor. And I'm going to say that, look at the tonnage, 12,500. Do you remember that we had the Charles Martel was at 12,800? So this is really an armored cruiser. I would say it's definitely an armored cruiser in function and form and everything, but it is a darn heavy one. And the price you pay for that is literally the price. So it is as expensive as our Ocean class, which I would say pound for pound is a better ship than this heavy cruiser. Now, the disadvantage of those battleships is that they do not do as well raiding. So they're not going to be our, the Jean Nicole. I think the principle of the French fleet in the early 1900s, the strategy that they stuck by, was some powerful coastal battleships paired with merchant raiding. That the only way that they thought that they could actually fight the British fleet, the Royal Navy, was just by harassing the shipping. So this is essentially the strategy that Germany would later adopt. They're more famous for it because the French never had an opportunity to put that to put that theory into practice. All right, so moving down to the last one I really want to talk about besides some of the light cruisers is the Latouche Treville. I'm sorry again, but I have really mixed feelings about this heavy or armored cruiser. I was already talking about heavy armor when it was 5.5. An 8-inch belt, I just think is overkill. I think it's actually overkill. You don't actually need 8 inches of belt, and if you wanted to take a look at what 8 inches penetrates, we can kind of see. We'll just go to gun data. You can see that even from 5,000, we're only going to be penetrating 6 inches of armor. We can assume that at 2,000 or something, that maybe we can get up to 7. But 8 inches of belt, it might be just a little bit too high. So she's maybe a little bit too heavily armored for her purpose. She's armored as heavily as some battleships in her belt. And also her deck is probably over armored as well, because with 8-inch guns, she's never going to engage at range. So either she's going to flee from enemies who can engage her at the range where she would need to use her deck armor, or basically she's toast unless she can close. If the enemy's already shooting at her with the large enough guns to hit her deck, it's probably not an enemy she wants to engage regardless, because it's a higher caliber gun. And in that case, she should be using her speed to get away. So I would gladly sacrifice belt and deck to get. Again, I'm a big proponent of speed, and it'll be interesting for you guys to see the difference that the different directors, those being the three YouTube people that were in part of the succession. It'll be interesting for you guys to see how we treat these different things. And, if you guys play Rule the Waves for yourselves, you can adopt whatever strategies you like. Okay, so the last thing was the light cruisers. There's not really much I want to say about it. I really like the light cruisers. I was a big fan looking through these. Really light, extremely low maintenance, and I'm a big fan of that. I think the 4-inch guns are pretty good for a long-range merchant raider, which is exactly what this Fax is. The Trude, I don't mind the 5-inch guns. I've also made 5-inch guns, especially when you get quality 1 on those for my light cruisers. But I think that there's this weird, maybe it's just psychological based on battles I've fought. Admiral Tortuga, an old veteran, of course. I have had more success with 6-inch guns than 5-inch guns. That's an obvious enough comment, but even with the higher rate of fire of 5-inch guns, and even on destroyers, I haven't seen 5-inch guns perform well. And I think that's just bad experience, like not a large enough sample size. But anyway, the big one I want to talk about, the Lavoisier. I really like this ship, and I appear to have lost the superstructure, but that's okay, we'll ignore that. So at 8 6-inch guns, this is really much more a very Tortuga-styled design. I would have made my turrets 2.5, but 6-inch conning tower is exactly what I would have put. The 5 6-inch broadside is phenomenal. It's basically the most you'll get until like 1920, when you can start getting double turrets on your light cruisers. So, maybe you can squeeze out one more and you get a 6-side broadside, but that's a marginal gain from 5 to 6. So, it's a great ship. Nice, and it's a little bit more expensive, but not too bad. And then we have this last one, the Sardinia, which I also am a pretty big fan of. The only thing I don't like about it is the 10 3-inch guns. I don't like having these smaller secondaries because these are useless against anything but destroyers. And lighter, merchant ships, minesweepers, etc. The 6-inch guns, I think the last gun, the smallest gun that'll penetrate light cruiser armor is a 4-inch gun. So this is just adding, and I know that a light cruiser is definitely an anti-destroyer role a lot of the time. But I prefer to make my light cruisers anti-light cruisers that also can take on any kind of destroyers. I mean, obviously a light cruiser is going to be able to defeat a destroyer one-on-one almost any day of the week, unless there's some lucky chance with torpedoes or whatnot, but light cruisers are pretty maneuverable. You won't see too many hits on with torpedoes on them. So anyway, I just prefer to use the extra tonnage of light cruisers to make them better at going up against other light cruisers, because you already know that they're going to sink destroyers, and this just kind of, I think, if I was to guess, this kind of just reduces the amount of time it would take for you to sink those destroyers. Okay, so these are all my thoughts. I really don't like any of the destroyers. Destroyers don't really come into their own. People who have seen my previous series will just pretend that that is the mentality that the documents that Tortuga has been writing for the last 6 years under the tenure of Historical Gamer. I've been a big proponent, let's just say, of not using destroyers until torpedoes become more effective. And that's, in previous series, I actually have not even built destroyers until 1910. So I really don't find that these are effective. What they're best at right now is probably just coastal patrol. But my very first course of action, although we don't have the money to do it, so I might as well, I mean, I'm just going to do it anyway, because I do want it to be the very first thing that I do, is I'm going to make, ooh, good God. Let's just have it all designed because it'll get there about what I want. I'm going to make a minesweeper, and this minesweeper is actually capable of taking on enemy destroyers. It's not fast, but it'll have 2 3-inch guns, and the more important thing is it's going to have armor. So if the enemy destroyers only have 3-inch guns, they can actually take a small amount of a beating, which is just kind of insane that your minesweepers would be effective against destroyers. But this is kind of a design I stumbled upon, and I really found that you can actually get this weird, very cool, design out of this ship. So let's go to 215. I think I can go one more maybe. So let's go to 245, which gives our ammo weight of 7. We have 8 remaining. That's not enough for us to do anything. I can go reliable, I think. And on top of that, we can actually put conning tower armor on, I believe. So there it is. Now this will jump at like 6. Okay, good. So the conning tower, this is kind of an insane ship. I would agree with you that it's a little bit crazy. In fact, I want to take the armor down so we have a little bit more extra weight. So there it is. So we have a 200-ton ship that nonetheless has a 7-inch conning tower, 1-inch turrets, 1-inch on both the top and the side, and belt. So basically, it's really good at taking on destroyers. Now, it's not fast. The destroyers can easily run away, but it's just going to be an insanely cheap minesweeper that we can use for coastal patrol duties. So I don't think I'll be scrapping destroyers. I might look at that in a couple more months, basically in the time between the end of this episode and the beginning of my next one, whenever that is. But I don't know, I don't like the idea of scrapping too many ships, because these destroyers, I'd rather, in a cruel way, I'd rather just sacrifice them in combat. And I don't think, okay, so let's save this design, everything's okay. And we'll just build, interesting. I wonder why the Rebecca already exists. Okay, well let's switch over to this one instead, the Diamond. There it is. Okay, so the Diamond, I want to be a little bit careful about, because our monthly balance is already negative. That is one of the, of course, something that Historical Gamer harped on, and really the end of his legacy. So we talked about his ships, and we talked about him acquiring Sardinia in his successful war against Italy. But the last thing he did was, it's a skeptical decision. He was forced, but the general public was just sick of all the other navies building up without a French response. So his hand was twisted. I mean, his arm was twisted, I should say, into building a new class that was a little bit premature, because it's this pre-dreadnought battleship. It's not quite. I don't know what to say about this ship, because basically my opinion is, if we want to look at what 10-inch guns do, and I guess we might as well take a moment. This might be just a lot of going through what has gone on in the last 6 years and kind of voicing my own opinion on things. But if we look at what 10-inch guns can penetrate, first of all, we'll look at another unfortunate thing that happened was, it's the very next month that he had this design made, we had access to 14-inch guns. But unfortunately, like even a few months after that, we got quality 0 12-inch guns, so better quality ones. And none of those things. Well, I can very easily retrofit this to increase the guns. It's going to be a bit expensive, but it's probably worth it. So we look at the gun data here. For 12-inch guns, we're going to penetrate 8.5. You know, this is in the ebb and flow of gun and armor, where guns get better to penetrate the previous armor, and then armors get better to stop the penetration of the current guns, and then the current guns upgrade themselves again so they can penetrate the now current armor. You know, it's this back and forth. In that cycle, we're currently at this point in the early 1900s where armor is king. So basically, a lot of these battles in the early 1900s, I already mentioned that not a lot of battleships would be sunk. That's because the armor is really king, and the caliber of the guns are just getting big enough to penetrate that new armor. And that's the trend we'll see for the rest of this Succession series. So what we're looking at here is 8.5 inches at 5,000. Let's just presume, I know it's not good to do that, but let's just guess at 3,000, like point blank range, they can penetrate around 10. You can see that even though they're penetrating around 10, this one has 11.5. We've seen plenty of battleships with more than 10. So the quality -1 12-inch guns, they just have, it's not like there is a 0% chance if you don't, this is not like it's not just a step function that they either penetrate below the, if you have armor less than this, or they don't penetrate if you have armor more than that. It's not that cut and dry. It's all just kind of, I think that this is the point at which you're much more likely to penetrate or not. But we're not going to see very much penetration, obviously, from the early 1900s. But however, just going up to the 14-inch guns, we can see the huge difference this makes. Now you're penetrating, even at 5,000 yards, you're penetrating 10.5 inches. And probably you'll see that these ships will still penetrate at such a small range. They'll probably penetrate even 11 inches or more. So what is going on with the 10-inch guns, though? And this is what I would like to somewhat complain about. These can only penetrate 6 inches. Basically what we're looking at here is these cannot penetrate battleship level armor. So what you've made your battleship into is a redundant heavy cruiser. And I say it's redundant because it's not like France lacks for a superior heavy cruiser to dominate the seas. If they did, I shouldn't say heavy cruiser, I should say armored cruiser. But if France did not have like the La Touche Treville or the Deputy Toise, then we would need that role fulfilled by a battleship for defense of the high fleet. But these ships already fill that role, so we're kind of being a little bit redundant. That these 10-inch guns are not going to be doing very much damage against battleships, but the ones they are good at, the armored cruisers, we already have a ship which is perfectly capable of defending us. Now, that's not to say it's a bad design, and even the 10-inch guns can penetrate battleships. Especially what we've seen is a few of, like, I thought, the United States and the Historical Gamer's last episode revealed one of their ships they're making only has, I think it was 8-inch armor or something like that, in which case, hey, you know what? Our 10-inch guns are going to be good against that. Nonetheless, it's all about roles, right? You have to assign roles to everything in your fleet. What do you want your battleships to do? Sometimes we might even build a battleship which can't even barely can defend itself against other armored cruisers, and certainly would have a hard time against anything heavier than that. And those will be used just for strategic force projection, because we're not expecting a main enemy battle fleet to be, for example, in Southeast Asia. So if we get some really cheap battleships, we just build up a whole bunch of those, we dominate Southeast Asia because there's no other battleship response down there. And that the cheaper they are, in this case, the more we can make, which is better, just better. Or the more money we're saving for more battleships that remain in the combat zone. So I like to try to keep in mind, what is the role of these various ships that we're making? What purpose will they serve? And obviously, almost all of the best navies, certainly if you're playing as France, as we are, Germany, the British, or the United States, you're going to want one main line, one main battleship or dreadnought who can challenge anybody on the high seas. And right now we have this new Historical Gamer class which is in development, and it's going to have to do that work for us, even though it's a little bit it's not quite adequate for the role, just because it's only dealing with those 4 12-inch guns. But I have to say one great thing about it, extremely good armor. Nothing disappointing about this armor. And in even a weird way, this ship would be good into the very late game, because as guns get further in range and deck armor becomes more important, this is already sitting at 3.5 inches, which is insane. I don't think I usually go beyond 2.5 until 1915, and yet we already have one who's well geared up, ready to go. This kind of deck armor is what you'll see even on in my second tenure, which of course to play in game I don't know about, but that's as much deck armor as I think I'll put on my endgame ships. So enough talk. We're actually going to start moving forward. And I already did or did not build. I didn't build these yet, because there's two things. So I'm going to be focused on building towards the future. I think the best way to play this series is not to realize that you're going to end up, like what Historical Gamer did was perfectly fine, and I think it's totally in the spirit of our series. What's more, because we shouldn't be... I can't imagine a situation where a naval director, like I'm pretending that Historical Gamer just died, was suddenly, sudden death is what put me into the naval director position. But even if you were going to get fired, you probably wouldn't know that more than 3 months in advance. So that means you wouldn't be playing as if, in 6 years my time will be up. So I think that's the best way to play. We'll just charge forward, pretending that we will be there until the end of the game. And suddenly when January 1912 comes, when my time is up, it'll just be a surprise that now I have to pass the torch. But my plan is to build towards the future. So I want to get my dock size up right away. And I want to get those minesweepers to replace those destroyers right now. Especially because I really just don't like the destroyers that the game starts you with. They are not usually very good at doing anything. So, that is a lot of talking. I don't even know what class I dislike the most. 3-inch guns means these are useless against anything but destroyers and lighter. 4 torpedoes is not bad. So maybe that's something. I really, really dislike this. What is the point of these 2-inch guns when you already have 3-inch guns? I just don't know. Okay, so maybe this is our first casualty. These guys are from 1901, so it's quite unfortunate. And I really don't like the A. So S stands for short range, nothing is medium range. L, we have up here, is long range, very fitting for merchant raiders. A stands for, I think it's colonial, or is it? No. C is colonial, so it is shortened accommodations. What is it called? There's an actual word for it. Cramped accommodations. So the cramped accommodations sometimes has an effect on your unrest level. So I actually really don't like this Frond class. And it only has, 1, 3, okay, you know what? Our first move is going to be this. We're going to scrap a whole bunch of these destroyers. I just don't find any use for them. One, we have no torpedoes. Everything about destroyers is about torpedoes. And we already have 2 3-inch guns and 4 torpedo tubes on this. I don't see the point of having anything other than more torpedoes and less 2-inch guns. So, I hope we can scrap all of these at the same time. And we made a little bit of money, but more importantly, we just saved maybe 200,000 on our monthly balance, which is really nothing. I know, it's really nothing. Did I start building? I haven't even started building the minesweeper yet, but I guess that's going to have to wait. So let's take a look at what ships are where. Okay, I'll do that off camera. Let's just push on to the next turn. In order to stop our budget from going into negative, I will have to halt one of these ships temporarily. I really want the Sardinias out, so I'm going to let those finish, but I kind of don't need these Historical Gamer classes yet. Research. I forgot to completely change up my research as well. So I also have a different opinion about how we should progress in our research. And just like a naval director would do, I will influence things the way I would like them done. So I'm going to put a lot of things up to high here and just a very few things down to low. So we've already got 14-inch guns, which is good, but I would prefer quality 0 14-inch guns. If we can get that, then we know what our next battleship, our next dreadnought actually, will be based on. Now torpedo technology, I have mixed feelings about this. I do want better torpedoes, but I kind of don't think the better torpedoes right now will help much. I figure we can get this up to high in maybe 3 more years. Medium's fine here. Yeah, I think we're all good here. Just to let you know, in case you're not familiar with this, the priority, if you put everything to high, you might as well put nothing to high. It's all just relative. So let's just say you have 100 points of production or research that you can allocate. This is just telling how much to allocate to which category. It's not exactly done like that. I don't even know exactly how it's done, but that's just the way it's done. Is if I put everything up to high, it doesn't make it all better. It's just how do I want to allocate the various research points that I have. Okay, the last thing I want to do, but I can't do quite yet just because we just simply, well, actually halting that 1 really made a difference. So I'm going to go ahead and get our gunnery and night fighting training up. I want our crews really well trained. We already know that some of them are in elite status from the excellent job Historical Gamer did in the Italian campaign, but I want all the other ships just with the most superb gunnery training that we can have. And that's really going to make or break a lot of these fights is can you land the first blows? Sometimes just even landing the first couple of blows means that their ability to return fire is already reduced, and then the situation snowballs. So good, we got better hull savings. All these savings will stack up throughout the progression of the series. Main battery wing turrets, I don't really use this ever, but that's okay. I prefer our main batteries to only be on the center line. Okay. So we'll just keep moving on here. We're close to mastering control tops. A breakthrough in torpedoes. Some ships under construction, central firing, nothing important really. We'll try to speed through these turns because I suspect if we do go to war that'll take quite a few episodes. So I'll try to get through even all of 1906 on this first episode. So this is the new light cruiser by the Americans. 4,400, 8 5-inch guns, 2 3-inch guns. I'd say the design is really good. I would have put the deck up to 2 inches if you're already close enough. But it's probably fine. I would say either 1 or 2, make up your mind. 1.5 is like this middle point. It doesn't really help anybody. This is a really light ship. Good speed. Probably doesn't cost very much. I would take out the 2 3-inch guns for the reasons I already mentioned as well. Okay, here's the German dreadnought, Rhineland. This is very interesting. Okay, so this is what we'll be facing, potentially. Wow, I gotta say, unfortunately, I really like this design. 10-inch, we saw that 10 inch is about the cutoff for 12-inch guns. And they have 9 6-inch guns on each side. Perfect. Just a really solid design, I would say. Okay, so we have something that we can try to pit ourselves against. Okay, better fire control was that last one. That's really important. I put up fire control to high priority because more than anything, you can have the best armor, the best guns, but if you can't hit, obviously it just doesn't matter. You know what? One other thing I wanted to do, I forgot. I had all these things didn't write them down, but just kind of perusing before. I want to take our intel down with Japan and Austria-Hungary. These two are very unlikely to give us any kind of technological gains that we can steal through espionage. So I'm not as interested in doing anything with them. And you know what? I don't think Italy, if I'm remembering correctly, Italy does not, they have poor education. So you know what? We're going to take our intel down with Italy as well because I really want to save all the money I can. We finally actually can get my Diamant class. And how many? Well, avert your eyes if you don't want to see minesweepers because I plan on getting a lot of them. These are just, in my opinion, the best. They're far better than having destroyers at this point. So that's what I'll be doing is slowly replacing our destroyers with minesweepers. And then I won't be around, but technically I would probably reverse that strategy around 1915 or maybe a little bit before that. Started getting some more destroyers. Now I won't scrap the old minesweepers. They're so cheap. I mean, the maintenance, if we saw on these, is 5,000. So we can get basically 2 minesweepers for every 1 destroyer, which is fantastic. I mean, for coastal patrol anti-submarine warfare during war, it's just the number of ships that matters. The quality does not. So it's obviously better if you can just put more minesweepers in at less cost. Okay, good. Torpedo protection number 1. Torpedoes are, in my campaigns in Rule of Ways, have been really devastating, so I will always invest in torpedo protection if I can. We also have these turret improvements. I really find these are also useful because they increase our rate of fire. And that's just another way of hitting more often. So, of course, we appreciate that. And great, industrial production is soaring. We should get a little bit of a boost to our budget. 284 is up to 291. Very good. Central firing, Italy, nobody cares. Moving on. Oh dear. The new naval secretary has read a book on naval strategy extolling cruiser warfare. He wants you to build at least 10 additional cruisers. Now, I kind of feel like this is appropriate because that is historically the French view was let's get a lot of cruisers for merchant rating. I will say yes, but I might actually design my own my own cruiser. Yeah. I think we'll say of course. I love the budget. The prestige is good. Now, mind you, having a huge budget over what your like natural amount is, because we do these decisions which increase our budget, but they're kind of like France itself doesn't have any more money coming to it. We're just demanding more money from France. What this can end up doing is increasing the unrest because people start complaining like, okay, France only has so much money, but all these decisions that the naval director is making with these various parties is allocating more of that national budget to naval spending. And then people start getting upset. You see unrest build up. And unrest, if it gets to around 8, 9, 10, is a quick way to end the game. You'll be thrown out. So we don't want to do that. Nonetheless, I think I just wanted to point that out as a side note because I will be taking this decision. You can even choose not to build them. And I happen to know, just playing it for a long time, I guess, that we have 6 months to build these. So it's currently August. How about in January, we'll start our building of these, and that'll give us a few extra months of extra budget to save up for the 10 new... we'll definitely do light cruisers as well, even though... Yeah, I don't think we need... I'm going to think more about it. We may not even get to this point in this video, because we've already gone 36 minutes. In fact, that's probably enough for us. A major arms firm wants to sell ships to a South American country. This will be good for our arms industry, but risk leaking sensitive technology. What is my recommendation? I will risk the leak of... this sounds absurd, but I really want that budget up. We have to make amends for the historical gamer class somehow. And we can see that even with these efforts, I'm just not able to build these new ones. So I'm going to halt myself, the Tortuga Power. Yeah, we'll halt that one, and we'll let the Chardons start building. We'll probably have to halt these again when we have to build the remaining light cruisers, and that'll happen in January. But that's going to call this first episode to a close. Obviously, the pace was a lot slower than I'll have in the next few videos, just because I spent probably like 20 minutes just talking about different things. And moving forward in the future, it'll always just be about what's going on in the present moment. So I really hope you're enjoying this series. It's been really fascinating to me. When I first got the save game from Historical Gamer, I probably spent an hour, maybe an hour and a half just poring over it. It's a lot of fun, and I highly recommend for anybody who does rule the waves, who does play, just go jump on the forum and ask if anybody else is interested in a Succession series. Especially for me, I played a lot of series with Rule the Waves, and this really makes it fresh. It's like a new game all over again. And of course, I feel very grateful, very lucky, to be paired up with the likes of such great content creators as Historical Gamer and XTRG. So if you haven't already done so, if you're just getting this from my channel, make sure to go over to their channels and check out their stuff. They have really top-notch stuff, top-notch quality. So that's enough for me for this episode. I hope to catch you back for the next one very soon. And until then, take care.